What is crack-a-lackin', fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale, joined by my certified fantabulous co-host, Mr. Grant Hughes. We are going to record material that could probably just get blown up within seconds of us speaking about it, releasing it. Hopefully some of the stuff we record and don't release till the day after holds up. But before we get started, just the usual reminder to continue subscribing wherever you consume us. Is that on YouTube? Hit that sub button. Like every video, comment, help the algorithm love us back. Subscribe to us on your typical podcast platform, Spotify, Apple. Ratings and reviews on Apple do help us out a bunch in the charts. Join our Discord. The link to that is in the podcast description. Follow us on all our socials at HardwoodKnocks on Twitter and the Tickety Talk at Hardwood_Knocks on Instagram. And finally, if you've done all those things, please, word of mouth, recommendations, we tweet our promos, shout us out on Twitter. I typically do respond if and when I see them. And actually, finally, if you would like to support the show, the best way to do so outside of everything I just listed, or in addition to, buy some merch. Grant is rocking the Apology to Mitchell Robinson t-shirt. Jared Allen, get the fuck out of here. You couldn't perform up to snuff against the New York Knicks. I have on the Hardwood Knocks hoodie. Grant's got his cup, which he was, I don't know if I mentioned this, but we did a Bleacher Report live stream, and Grant is so dedicated to the brand. It wasn't coffee time, but he had the cup in his background so that all the viewers on Bleacher Report could see. So buy our merch. And with that, we get to the question everyone's dying to know the answer to. Grant, how the heck are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm very excited to potentially be wrong about a lot of things on this podcast for reasons outside of our control, because the news will just change, because that's the season we're in, as opposed to just having incorrect thoughts. You know, that's your fault. But if so-and-so gets traded or a team goes a different direction, then that's not on us. So we can be wrong all we want today, and I'm sure that we will.
I do have another question for you that's not really related at all. Let's just hypothetically say that you have a stepfather who is missing in a submarine. Are you still going to that Blink-182 concert that you have on your schedule?
This hits really close to home because it's like, no, this is like the least relatable news story of all time. Yeah, that guy was a superstar. The stepson that just shot his shot over and over based on the tragedy. Good for him, I guess. I don't know. People know what we're talking about, right? It was like the biggest story for 48 hours.
I'm sure people know, because it was the actual premise of like, oh, if music is actual escapism for me, and I could understand still going, but like turning it into content, like in hashtag, like basically hashtag, like where's my dad, stepdad, or something like that, like whatever he did was just so cringy. But I know you have a Blink-182 show coming up, I think end of this month or at the start of July. So I figured it was
well, it's funny you mentioned it. I did have tickets, and it was for last Friday, and I ended up selling them because they were worth a lot more than the experience. So I have the complete opposite approach to this kid.
I'm so angry at you right now. No wonder you never would have told me if I didn't ask this question.
No, I would, because I knew your reaction would be.
This is how the fractures and fissures on Hardwood Knocks stop. You can't put a price on Blink-182 tickets if they're helping someone through their missing stepfather in a submarine.
You know what? You can, and I did.
Did you sell the tickets to him?
No. Well, I don't know who bought them. You know, the good folks at Ticketmaster handled the transaction. So maybe I helped him, you know, in some small way. We're all just out here trying to help each other. Shall we help the listeners discuss the Northwest Division? Segue.
Yes. As usual, we will be trying to keep this pace because we went way too long in the Pacific Division. So I will be setting alarms. You might hear Blink-182 in the background, although I'm so disappointed in Grant. I don't want to feel the pangs of disappointment every time that they play. But do you want to take us through our first team, the Vitals, and I will set the alarm?
I do. We are going with the Denver Nuggets first in the Northwest Division here. They're key free agents. I should say singular, but that would be a slap in the face of Jeff Green, who's also a free agent. Bruce Brown is the main guy. He's got a player option. The Nuggets are pretty limited in what they can offer him, so he is the very hot MLE plus candidate for like every team out there. Jamal Murray, these always surprise me, is extension eligible. He can get up to 3 years and 150-ish million would be his max. Denver's cap situation, as is the case for most teams that have a lot of success, they're over the tax. They probably will not have the full or the mini. Well, it depends on what happens with Bruce Brown, what they get as far as their full or their mini MLE. We are assuming that to get to that figure that we do not have holds for Brown or Green. But we'll discuss that in more detail. Notable trade exceptions. They still have one for like another couple of weeks from the Monte Morris trade. $9.1 million expires July 6th. Biggest needs, Dan. So this team won the title, and those teams tend to not have huge needs, but nobody's perfect. So what, if you're the Nuggets, what is item number one on your offseason priority list?
It's Bruce Brown, because I think he determines your biggest need. Is it going to be a backup ball handler / another veteran wing, or is it going, like right now, if he comes back at just kind of like backup 5, with like they're pretty much just set. And so I'm very interested to see what he does. I know Michael Malone said he wasn't going anywhere, but they can offer him a starting salary slightly north of $7 million, or the taxpayer. Have you seen? I don't have a specific number on the mini MLE. I've like asked people, and they like, we have the non-taxpayer MLE hammered out. We know what the room is going to be. Like the room is $7 million. So the taxpayer MLE should probably be higher. They might not have access to it though, but it could be greater than what they could offer Brown. If they can access it, they can offer him that. My guess would be, even in this market where we've seen cap space so far dry up in certain places, he should have full MLE offers in that 12.4 starting $1 million range. I would give him the full boat, like 4 years. And the only way, not the only way, but if he returns, if he opts in or opts out and signs a non-bird contract, this is very much a wink-wink situation where they're going to give him a pay raise next summer using early bird rights, which I will say before I throw it to you, maybe there's some investigation into it. I don't particularly care about that stuff. I would find it encouraging though, because it means that this team plans on continuing to spend, unless they're looking at it like, well, when we get there, that's when we'll look at like, oh, do we move Michael Porter Jr., Aaron Gordon, or KCP at that point?
Yeah, I think, well, Nick Batum is the example that gets thrown out a lot, because I think he did something similar with the Clippers a few years ago.
He did it twice. Reggie Jackson too, remember?
So I don't think it's likely that will, the league is going to look askance at that. But I do think, like, I don't know if even that's enough for Brown, right? I mean, we will discuss and have discussed that the cap space situation is getting a little bleak out there with some exceptions. So it's not like the Nuggets are going to have, crazy numbers to compete with, but even that wink promise where, take this 1 year deal, we get, the opportunity to really pay you a year from now. Like, I don't know what that year from now, outlay looks like. And is it going to be competitive with, if he can get the full MLE or more, right? Like we keep talking about how like, oh, he's an MLE guy. I mean, he might just be worth a little more than that. Like that wouldn't be crazy to me if he got 15 a year, for example, right? I mean, he just played a huge role on a title winner and has like been really malleable and adapted to a bunch of different situations. Like the fit for him, he's such a weird player, but he's also oddly a universal fit because he can just do so many different things. So I don't know what the number would need to be like in the, the backroom deal promise to, I guess really the play is we're going to try to win another title. And even if you do want to leave and this wink thing falls apart, you're going to look even better, a year from now.
I think what helps them is that many of the teams with cap space need more of like an actual primary ball handler where he's going to provide like secondaries, like even Utah now, like they could use like sort of a floor general. That's not really, or game manager. He's not really that. Like if he was your backup, you could throw him 2 years, 32 million. And that's something the Spurs could do. They still don't have their floor general, but they just have they have just so much flexibility when you're looking at kind of like the 6 and 7 spot in their 8 in their rotation. That would he sign a 2 year, like $34 million deal with them? Just surround Wemby with as many like connective high character guys as possible. Charlotte's a team that could have cap space as you're talking about a team that could use a secondary ball handler, someone that defends. And I also think his mark will be a little bit bigger if you could trust him. Like if he was defending 3s and 4s rather than like 1s and 2s and some 3s, does Indiana then take a look at him? But I'm with you. We're like, if I was a team with cap space, I might just pay him. Like if he's going to take a short-term windfall, specifically like 2 years, maybe 3, I would do it. And I don't know how you look, that trade exception could help, but the not the dream, but like the whole Alex Caruso fitting snugly into it, that ship has sailed because now his money goes up. What targets would you look at for them? Knowing, and again, do you have anything to add to okay, let's see what happens with Bruce Brown, and then you're going to need like a backup ball handler or another veteran wing if he leaves, and then a backup 5. Is there really anything else that this team could use?
Not really. I don't know what you'd do with the Jeff Green spot because he did actually play and like not very well. But that's such an easier hole to fill with a
It
minimum
might even
salary
be,
guy.
is it, next year, the year we see Zeke Naji?
Right. Yeah, that's true. You have the organic, and that, I mean, there are internal options that Denver has some guys that they really do believe in that are going to be ready for, like Peyton Watson, for example, is a guy that they see as contributing potentially next year. No, so as far as targets, like we're kind of we're not spending lavishly here.
It's minimums, basically. It's minimum. It's like they can
Yeah.
they can spend the minimum if you think Brown is coming back.
So I guess if I start with the guards, I think Dennis Schroeder is probably much more than a minimum player, but he's someone they should at least fire an offer at. Shake Milton is kind of interesting to me for the same reasons. Then you kind of get into the wings and bigs, and Joe Ingles, for example, just another guy to hit a 3 and make a decision. Not going to help you defensively. I'm not sure how that might kind of compromise the Nuggets in the ways that we've all thought they were compromised until they just defended well enough to win a championship. Do you have anybody else you like in the free agent bucket that I haven't mentioned or that plays a different position?
If we were looking at bigs, like is Bismack Biyombo, Paul Reed, Dwight Powell might all be too expensive. Like those would be names. The 2 names I like that I think would be very gettable, O'Shea Brissett and Javonte Green, where it's like if they can hit enough threes, the spectrum of positions that they can defend. And Javonte Green wasn't recovering well from his injury as of March. But like if it's the minimum and you think that he's going to play, like that's someone who he'll defend 1 through 4. And he hit like 37% of his limited number of threes last year. And so that's like like kind of just a flyer guy. Bruce Brown stays, goes, whatever. Like that's just an additional, like someone who could really help your defense. And maybe he plays regular minutes, maybe he doesn't, depending on, how much you're relying on Christian Brown next year or Strother or Peyton Watson, as you mentioned. That's just sort of like a sleeper for teams that are really strapped. I could just see him being very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's see.
Do we have anything else on them though? This feels like a short, like they're kind of just easy to tackle because they don't need much. I think we both agree, like they enter next year as title favorites no matter what, right? Or is there, if Bruce Brown leaves, do you equivocate on that?
I think unless another team, even if Bruce Brown leaves, unless somebody else really levels up, I think you probably just have to go with the Nuggets. The usual suspects will all be up there, but I think the default should be Denver for sure. And they really are just a 1-issue team. Get Brown back and then offseason's a success. Don't get him back. You really are you need somebody that's going to dribble the ball, I think, for, a few minutes a game. That takes us to the Minnesota Timberwolves, which I will give you their basics here now. Their key free agents, Gilgeous-Alexander Walker, who I am trying to send everywhere as a value free agent. Jalen Noel also. NAW is restricted if I didn't mention that. Anthony Edwards, eligible for a max extension, probably going to get it. That's just under $200 million for 5 years. He can get the all NBA language that could raise that up to super max for just about $236 million. Jaden McDaniels is also extension eligible. Someone I would expect to get in the neighborhood of $100 million. We can discuss that. The Wolves have, they also did some business. They extended Naz Reid. So they got about 10 million they're within 10 million of the tax after that extension, without considering the holds for Alexander Walker and Jalen Noel. They're probably going to be a mini mid-level team. That looks like the likeliest outcome. They have a Jared Vanderbilt trade exception worth 4.4 million that expires on July 6th. So this team does not need another big since they're spending like 400. There was somebody aggregated all the salaries. It was like 270 for Cat or 170 for him and 130 for. It's like several $100 million for 3 centers. So they don't need a center. So what else? What do they need? What are you looking at? And you're a Naz Reid guy more so than I am. So maybe before we talk about targets, how do you feel if you haven't already discussed the Naz Reid deal looks?
I thought it was a bargain, and people are like, well, that's a lot to pay for a third big. And you don't get to evaluate him in the context of this roster that you built. It's what is he worth on the market? And I would have given him the full MLE. If I was like a team like, the Jazz, I would have looked at pairing him in the front court with, I know you just have Taylor Hendricks, but like him and Walker Kessler and Larry Markin, they could have worked together. He would have been perfect in Indiana. So there were teams that I think really could have used him, that maybe would have tried to even encroach with, sign and trade possibilities if they didn't have cap space, but had flexibility under the hard cap. And look, he can play with either one of these bigs if they really want to. I don't know. Defensively, him and Towns will be rocky, but like he can play with Rudy Gobert, but he can still play with Towns. And I'm fine with the number. A lot of people are trying to connect the dots and say this means that the Wolves are going to trade Towns. I don't think re-signing Naz Reid is the impetus for you trading Karl-Anthony Towns. That I disagree with.
Do you think the Reid deal is more of an asset preservation move as opposed to our vision is we will have 3 centers and we'll move, you know what I mean? Like, is it an asset thing, or is it we believe this guy will help us in ways X, Y, and Z?
It's probably a little bit of both, but it has to be on some level asset preservation, because I don't think you would have this much money invested in your 3 big. Like if you had Rudy Gobert and Karl-Anthony Towns, I don't think there was a scenario in which you thought that Naz Reid was going to be a mid-level type play. I don't think you make that trade otherwise. And now look, he's more valuable to them as a trade chip himself on this contract once he becomes trade eligible. That's just a number that can bring back more salary. And there aren't teams that are going to, you don't balk at that. Like if you want him, even if he's coming off the bench, like that's not the numbers that they have invested in bigs is ridiculous because of Gobert and Towns. It's like if you're paying mid-level to your 3rd big, that's not really a huge deal anymore.
Yeah, I worry that I like Reid, maybe not quite as much as you. I worry that like if he is a backup, this is a lot of money for a backup center, even of just a pure second stringer. But if he's like someone like, I'm trying to think of a comparison. Well, someone like the Kings thought Richaun Holmes was, and he was for a while, and you're paying him, 12-ish a year or 14 a year, and he's a starter and he's a plus starter, then this deal's great. If Reid is someone who can, if and when they trade him, can just, you slot in, you're going to play 28 minutes a game, maybe more as a starter. We're paying you this much. Like that works for me. But if he is, I don't know, just in that murky, morass of backup 5s that are not that, hard to, or are pretty indistinguishable from like minimum salary guys, you can go sign a guy off the scrap heap and he can give you 85% of what Reid does. Then it's rough. But if he's a starter, I think totally fine.
There's his floor game alone. We could talk about the floor spacing where it's, you can find bigs that'll take 3s. His floor game alone is just, and there's perimeter mobility on defense there. So I think it was a no-brainer for them. Mm-hmm. I don't think it informs what they're going to do in the front court one way or the other. I think I just think you keep him, you don't keep him. This was the right play for them. What do you think is the bigger need? They can use a backup point guard, but I also think they could use more. It doesn't have to be a part of their closing lineup. I know you have Anthony Edwards. I know you have Mike Conley. You have Naz Reid. You have Towns. But I do feel like they could use another wing shooter. Like they have a wing who's a shooter where it's Taurean Prince. And then I know a lot of people are high on Wendell Moore. I don't know how many minutes you're planning on having him play next year. And Jaden McDaniels, again, hit a high percentage of his 3s, but I'm talking just like a caps lock shooter on the wings. And Anthony Edwards is more of an off the dribble guy. Taurean Prince is like the closest they sort of get to that. But I do see the argument for why just another backup playmaker behind Edwards and Conley would be people's prerogative to target.
Yeah, I think for me, it's probably the point guard spot. Although if Edwards is increasingly ready to do more on-ball stuff and just be the primary creator, which I think is sort of the end game with him, like a Donovan Mitchell type role, I think it would be the hope where he just does run your offense.
He might even be. I don't mean to. It might be more of a James Harden like role.
Yeah, sure.
Where he's just so, and I feel like we saw that at points last season. But please, I didn't mean to.
No. I think it is a very much an open question. Like, what kind of lead ball handler might he ultimately be? Like, I was just using Mitchell as the guy who, well, he's a 2. Maybe he's not a 2. Like maybe he can run a bunch of pick and rolls to great success, at least this past season. So, and Conley's age and durability is obviously a concern. So I think just to insulate yourself against, oh shit, Conley, is out for 4 to 6 weeks with whatever, and Anthony Edwards is just suddenly, maybe he's ready for it, but suddenly has this massive playmaking, ball handling role that is just, it's a lot to ask. So I think I'd probably focus on a backup, or maybe you'd even call it like a 3rd point guard. You don't need to go crazy, and they can't, but you got to have somebody, I think, that you could throw out there for, a decent stretch of the season if you needed to, and feel like he's not going to just, the offense won't go off the rails.
My favorite target for that role, and it's with the mini MLE, Trey Jones. I don't know how much he costs. I'm assuming the Spurs would match anything in that area. And so after him, I really like the idea of Javon Carter here, assuming he opts out. And he's not much of a game manager, but just like he will give you 94 feet of defensive hellfire. And I just, I would like, he can play off the ball. So you can play him with Edwards. I don't think you would play him with Conley at the same time. Like you can play him with Kyle Anderson, have those type of outlets. I really love the fit with him. And if you want someone who is going to be more of a pick and roll player, I think Shake Milton for sure. That's just, and if people don't know about, and I blame them, like he was buried in the Sixers rotation, but like when they had injuries last year, he was capable of running some pick and rolls for Philadelphia. Yeah. So Shake Milton, that might be a minimum target, but Dennis Schroeder could be semi interesting here, right? In mini MLE territory. Like you don't sacrifice anything. Like he played some really pesky point of attack defense to the Lakers most of last season. Will get going downhill. I don't know how much you trust him as a shooter or a playmaker, but that might be an interesting name.
Yeah, I don't mind him, especially alongside either Edwards or Conley, right? Because you can, if this defense that he showed with the Lakers persists, you could just spare. I mean, Edwards, I think, has the capacity to become a great defender, but if you don't want him to have to handle that and run the offense, you throw Schroeder out there. I think Schroeder could guard some twos if he's playing that position with Conley. So I like that a lot. If you're looking at wing shooting, though, you can't quite split the difference, but someone like Seth Curry, I don't know that the mini MLE is going to get there for him. He's a tricky player to try to evaluate. I think Schroeder's kind of the same way. Like the mini MLE feels, especially if it's 7 or 8 or whatever million, which I don't think it'll get to 8, but it feels like that's right around where they should be. But it's hard to know if that's going to get it done if they have multiple offers. Like is Minnesota the choice for those guys if they have more than one mini MLE offer? I don't know. I don't know if you mentioned Ayo Dosunmu restricted. Ooh. I don't know how the Bulls value him, but if Trey Jones is someone that gets the immediate match at the mini MLE level, I think Dosunmu could be interesting too.
I actually have him penciled in for a lot more teams now because Stefan Noah Sporting News like listed him among free agents every team could afford because, and he really covers the Bulls. And they have Kobe White as a free agent. They have Zach LaVine. They have Alex Caruso, Lonzo Balls on the books, DeMar DeRozan. So like they're going to be up against task concerns in a crowded backcourt. I thought it would take, he can only get the starting full like bigger MLE to start as a max salary. I thought it would take that at least plus like kind of a poison pill to get him out of Chicago. Apparently he might be way more accessible. And I'm just like someone who could defend almost 1 through 4. And no, he's not a primary playmaker. His shooting fell off. Like he can put pressure on the basket and he can like run the offense well enough if you give him space. I would love him basically on every single team at this point.
Well, I think too, you might look at, it's hard to know how they do this, but it looks like the Wizards are very much open to moving anything. So Monte Morris, Monte Morris would be like pretty significantly overqualified for the role he'd play here. But that's, DeLon Wright, I think too, is another one that makes a lot of sense.
The only thing is the alarm went off. That's tricky. And they're just not built for a mid-end trade unless they're gonna like you could give Taurean Prince for Monte Morris, but is that a trade you're making? And you're not trading Kyle Anderson? You're like you can't even step ladder your way there, really. So they're if they're gonna make a trade, it almost has to be a mega one. It feels like without any picks involved. So, but I'm so interested what this team looks like at full strike next year. By the way, because we just didn't see it for enough this season.
Always a great place to be. The only trades you can make are massively consequential ones. Let's hit the Portland Trailblazers. Alphabet got us again. Oklahoma City Thunder. Key free agents, Dario Saric, key extension eligible candidates, nobody. So they vaporized a little of their cap space, but the Thunder still have about 14 million or a little more. But they have a bazillion players under contract. If they guarantee Lindy Waters III, Jeremiah Robinson Earl, Isaiah Joe, and Aaron Wiggins. They have some trade exceptions. None of them are over the $4.3 million one they have for Darius Bazley. They still have a Ty Jerome trade exception, which is hilarious. $4.2 million. Mike Muscala, $3.5 million. So the Thunder, again, have a bloated roster as it is. So when you're starting to talk about needs, it's kind of like, well, who's going if you're going to bring in talent to fill these needs? What do you see? Well, what are the Thunder trying? What do the Thunder want to be this year? What do you envision them being as a team? Like, because that informs what they might go after, how they might use the rest of that cap space. Like, What do they need? What can they get? Who do they want to be? That's like 17 questions for you.
I think they, and I'll answer them all with the same refrain. I think they want to be last year's team plus Chet Holmgren at this point is what they added some more shooting with Davis Bertans. If you think they're going to stick with him, they have, and I think you noted this, just their roster spots alone, they technically can't just go out and sign a free agent unless they're going to waive somebody. So I'm disappointed that they vaporized some of their. I get why they did it. I mean, to move up 2 spots, though, I'm surprised it did cost that much. I'm not going to question Sam Presti, and Cason Wallace is certainly intriguing, but that was, it's $22 million guaranteed for Bertans when you factor in that $5 million partial guarantee. That's a lot to move up 2 spots. I would like to see them get some more shooting on this team, even though they have Isaiah Joe and Lindy Waters and now Chet Holmgren and Davis Bertans. I would like to see them get, they were 28th in defensive rebounding rate last year. Chet Holmgren will help that some, but can they get another bigger body to play next to him who, even if they're not going to grab a ton of rebounds, maybe will just be an aggressive, like, box out guy? They were my favorite outside of New Orleans trying to broker complicated sign and trades. They were my favorite. Let's just throw a shit ton of money at Brook Lopez team. They could still do that. I just don't know. When you look at their cap number, is that going to get him to leave Milwaukee with how much cap space they have? Like, let's say they can get to 15 or 16 million, which they would basically have to. 2 years, 32 million. That just feels like it probably needs to be like between 17 and 22, which they could get to if they wanted to. They're not the team that's going to do that. And I want to make that clear. That's okay.
Yeah.
The Thunder and Thunder fans are always in our YouTube mentions. They've always saying this to me whenever I write something at Bleacher Report. Like, that's not what they're going to do. And I go, I present it with the caveat, I know, but they're good enough to start thinking about it. And so, like, do you have my whole thought process here is I don't even expect them at this point to just go out there and sign a free agent who they envision being a part of their top 8 rotation.
Yeah, probably not, unless they really luck out and somehow Grant Williams comes for the amount of cap space they have. Seems unlikely. Although,
you think? I was about to say,
I'm starting to think I'm wrong about Grant Williams, because every time we're not going to talk about the Kings today, but they cleared 30 some odd million in cap space with some draft night moves, and it's kind of like, well, if they're not going to go sign Draymond Green, which I don't think they will, like, Grant Williams makes a lot of sense. What's it going to take? Like, I think Porzingis getting to Boston, now we're just talking about everything but the Thunder, but we'll circle back eventually. I think Porzingis getting to Boston means Grant Williams is less likely to be back. I think, but at the same time, I just feel like he can fit anywhere, because if you need him to guard 5s, he can guard 5s. If you need him to space as a 4, he can do that. He can switch a little. Like, he's someone I could totally see justifiably getting 17, 18 million. Like, 20 feels really scary. I don't think he would be worth that. But anything from, I think to circle back, the 14 million that the Thunder could give him feels like that might just get matched by Boston, if only, again, we've talked about it, from like an asset preservation standpoint. So
that's a good point.
It's right on the borderline. I think Lopez is for sure priced out. Trey Lyles, I think, could bring the shooting you're talking about, but the Kings seem to want to bring him back, and you're not going to give him, the MLE or 10 million plus or whatever it is if you're the Thunder. So
he would probably help their rebounding too, in addition to their spacing, though.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of just a hulking center like a Lopez makes tons of sense, because just to like insulate Chet from getting banged around in what will be his like asterisk rookie season. I think that's the idea. But again, it's like to get back to what you said, it's totally fine if they just don't do anything and take on just use that cap space for whatever. Take on another bad like contract if you can even does it. I don't know.
I get it. So who are you getting rid of though? Like, you're just looking at, I think we're at 16 players, right? When you factor in if they pick up Lindy Waters' team option, guarantee Aaron Wiggins, Isaiah Joe, and Jeremiah Robinson Earl, they're at 16 players. And it's just like, who are you? So you have to get rid of 2. They even miscount here.
I mean, Saric maybe is just because he's a free agent. He doesn't count, but you're probably not bringing him back.
Counting him. So yeah, they have 16. So you need to get rid of 2 players, and it's just like, I guess it would be.
Hold on. I just want to tell you, whoever we mention, it's going to piss people off, because there's like 7 or 8 guys that are all roughly equal value wise and slightly different. That people are, oh, he can't be that. You can't get rid of that one.
I think because you have have Isaiah Joe. It could be Lindy Waters, and maybe you find a trade destination with compensation for like a Trey Mann or an Aaron Wiggins would be my guess.
Yeah.
But look, we mentioned Grant Williams. I think he doesn't help their rebounding because he's so tiny. But like you said, defensively he could fit, and they need reliable shooting. If they were to take on players via trade, I think my two favorites would be if Brooklyn's looking to get off Joe Harris, and you think you could rehab his value. But the other one, and I'm wondering just Toronto, if they're focused on talent retention, Chris Boucher would be like a really good fit on this team. Maybe you want someone who's a little bit bigger, but he would help you rebounding, give you some more shot blocking, and theoretically can space the floor as well.
Yeah. Also, I mean, we've talked about him already, but Zeke Naji could be someone that if Denver is trying to trim some salary and they don't envision him playing, this is just take him into cap space and cut somebody that you don't value as much as him if you're the Thunder. You have that kind of flexibility too.
Yeah, that's a great point as well. I don't have anything else to say to them because I don't think they're going to have. Chet Holmgren's just like, that's a huge addition. If he is 75% of the player you think that he is, this team is just like, we could maybe stop talking about the play-in, and it's, are they going to be like better than the full strength Pelicans? Like, they are getting to that point where we need to have those conversations. My two biggest, this is only because we have so many minutes left on them, and we don't need to comment further. I'm obviously watching for Chet Holmgren. I'm very curious to see what type of role Case and Wallace gets in year one.
Yeah, we haven't even talked about
Josh Giddey and Shea Gilgeous-Alexander there already.
Yeah, I think. Well, who's their best five? It's Shea, Dort, Giddey, Williams, and Holmgren. Like is that like jumping the gun on Holmgren? Would it be other Jalen Williams maybe this year? Like,
no, it should be Holmgren.
Okay, then
is it Poku?
Everybody loves Poku. Yeah, I don't know. Wallace is really interesting. I think the theory of him makes a lot of sense next to SGA, but like if he's out there with Dort, man, that gets pretty scary defensively. But I'm not sure what you're doing scoring wise. Especially if I don't know. They got a lot of. I really like this team. You know, my favorite thing about the Thunder and any team in this situation is everybody that matters is either very likely to sustain their level of production or get better. And there's nobody where you're like, well, I don't know if that's going to be back next year or it's in for slippage. There's like no
Josh Giddey shoot as well from three might be kind of concerned. Like, I mean, like Chip Anglin's there, so he probably will. Like, is Casey Wallace going to shoot 45% from three? Like, what?
Yeah, no, I love this team. Are they a playoff team? Full stop. Yes or no? Playoff team.
They're
no
top
play-in.
10. They're top 10 in the West for sure. Let's go top 8. I'll say they'll be a top 8 team next year.
Okay. That's all I'm asking. Let's get to Portland since I tried to do that already once before, because this is the team that could ruin us. Although based on the last like 3 years, we're just going to have Damian Lillard and the front office stare each other down and wait for someone to like say, pull the ripcord, and it just won't ever happen. Although it's going to happen. That's my prediction. Anyway, so this is a huge swing team. Well, we'll get through the basics here, and then we can talk about that. I don't know if my take is hot, but I'm kind of annoyed enough by this to have a semi-hot take. So key free agents, Jeremy Grant, that's a big one. Matisse Thybulle is restricted, as is Cam Reddish. Drew Eubanks is also unrestricted. No extension candidates. They will probably have the mini MLE if they keep Jeremy Grant and either Thybulle or Reddish. They still have the Gary Payton II trade exception, which is worth $8.3 million. That's good through February of next year. Biggest needs. Do we even start there, or do we just start talking about Damian Lillard? Because I think that's probably the thing we need to hit.
Let's go through this as if they're going to keep Dame first, and then we get it. Because look, they said they plan on building a winner around him, and he had a meeting with them. And so we'll get into the Damian Lillard. And in fairness to Blazers fans, they're tired of hearing about the Damian. And I totally get. I'm tired of hearing about the Damian, talking about the Damian Lillard stuff. So let's go through this as if they're keeping Damian Lillard. And so the theory is, their key free agents, as you already mentioned, really are Cam Reddish, Matisse Thybulle, and Jeremy Grant. If they keep two of those players, they are maybe in the tax. They're a mini MLE team. I don't even know if they would spend the entire mini MLE. We can get into targets and what their biggest need is at that point. I would still say it's, can they modernize? You've been big on this, the 5-man rotation. I know that Yusuf Nurkic has extended his range beyond the 3-point line, but he's not the most, and he can hold up. Opponent shot like 58% against him at the rim last year. That's perfectly fine, but he's more of a standstill rim protector. Like you want someone with more mobility there, even if they're going to compromise some of your spacing. They probably still need a backup. But they always need a backup point guard. They just refuse to like invest in one. I know they have Simons, who's incrementally improved as a passer, yada, yada, yada. But they could also use like other wings, like reliable shooting wings, because I don't know if Matisse Thybulle can replicate him shooting 1,000,000,000% from three. So
I know, Dan, and he can't. Like he can't.
So there's needs, and I think that we could talk about let's just list some free agent targets that could make sense for them. Again, they're in the mini MLE territory. Like if you want a rim runner, Dwight Powell, Jock Landale's definitely more of a mobile rim protector on the offensive end, defensive end, excuse me. Javon Carter as sort of a backup one. Jay Crowder, Torrey Craig, if you're looking for maybe like combo forwards who could hit threes at a more reliable clip than a Thybulle or a Cam Reddish. But like that's the name. Like Jay Crowder is probably the most ambitious outside free agent type name that you could expect to get, right? Unless you really think Ayo Dosunmu's market's going to crater.
Yeah, I was going to say depending on how you feel about Carter, but like that's at least that's kind of bleak that's like a close question. Like who are we going to fire the bullets at? Is it going to be Javon Carter or Jay Crowder? It's not exactly like murderer's row here.
Right. And so my question to you is if the plan is, and I understand that this is going to lead into the Damian Lillard discussion.
Yeah.
And let's get this out of the way. As currently constructed, this team, bring back Jeremy Grant and at least one of Matisse Thybulle and Cam Reddish. They will fight maybe for a bottom playoff spot, play-in spot. And a lot of that's going to depend on how good Scoot Henderson and Shaedon Sharpe are next season, how much they're even playing. I understand why the Blazers want to keep both those dudes. Shaedon Sharpe showed a lot of some of the shots that he can hit is absolutely ridiculous. And he has that sort of at-will rim pressure. Scoot Henderson's almost the same way. Mm-hmm. And if you trust him to just be able to play off the ball, hit some set threes, even if he's not going to develop an off-the-dribble three, everything else is like, yeah, that works alongside Damian Lillard. They could be good. But now you're at a point where it's okay, Shaedon Sharpe, Anthony Simons, Damian Lillard, Scoot Henderson. None of those guys are wings. Shaedon Sharpe comes the closest. None of them are wings. But let's just, again, you're keeping Sharpe and Henderson, and I get why you want to do this. You're keeping Damian Lillard. Who is the best player that you can acquire via trade with your remaining assets, which, by the by, would be maybe if you want to include Chris Murray there, but it's Chris Murray plus Anthony Simons plus if you want to trade draft picks, you have a lottery protected pick to Chicago through 2028. So it has to be first allowable pick language or renegotiate with Chicago to get that pick unprotected, which maybe you could do. So who's the best player? Or you have Yusuf Nurkic's salary too, but who's the best player you can acquire using some combination of that package?
This is the problem. And you're right. This does get us into the broader Lillard discussion.
It's not OG Anunoby, spoiler alert. You're not getting OG Anunoby.
I was going to say that's the point because it isn't OG Anunoby. Because that is about the minimum threshold at where I start to say, okay, like maybe this does make sense. Because you go Lillard, you go Scoot, OG, Jeremy Grant, Nurkic, or maybe you move Nurkic to get someone who fits better. Then all this talk about we're going to build a contender around Dame. He's going to wait to see what we do before he makes a decision. Then it's like, then there maybe is a decision to be made, but I don't think that's enough for Anunoby. It's certainly not enough for Pascal Siakam. It's not enough for just you name anybody else that's been rumored. Like, I guess probably in hindsight, it would have been enough for John Collins based on what Collins went for. But that's the issue is you, unless you have another name, maybe that was a rhetorical question. I don't know, but
I think you could get, if it was just, I think you could get Miles Turner, and maybe you wouldn't even have to give up Simons. It's Nurkic and Chris, and then a pick, or it's like you're getting off Nurkic's money in the process, which that hurts your rebounding, but it definitely helps your defense. My hot take is, and if Blazers fans are still listening, because I feel like they might have tuned out after we said they can't get OG, if I'm the Raptors and the Blazers offered Murray and Anthony Simons, or Simons and first allowable first round pick, I would do it for OG. I would absolutely do it. That's how high I am on Anthony Simons, and also what I think his fit could be in Toronto. Mm-hmm. So from my perspective, I think you could get OG. I don't think Toronto from that perspective, but you're certainly not getting Mikal Bridges. Like these names that are popping up. You're certainly not getting Pascal Siakam. Like that stuff is not happening without including Scoot Henderson It's not happening.
Yeah. No, I mean,
and I think the issue is that you're more than an OG Anunoby away from actually contending for a title within Damian Lillard's window. And I want to make it clear,
that is the issue.
If he considers winning, contending for a playoff spot, that's fine. If that's what he wants to do, that's fine. And you could juggle these whatever timelines. But if he wants to contend for a title and they don't want to trade Scoot and Sharp, and I'm not I don't know what the deal out there is to trade either one of those players that would make me feel comfortable. I'm probably a little lower on Sharp than consensus, but I wouldn't be trading Scoot Henderson just as a package built around Pascal Siakam. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So I understand that you're at the behest of the trade market, but it does seem like whether they admit it or not, Damian Lillard and the Blazers, unless they're misleading us all publicly, have warring agendas or aims at this point.
Yeah, I think to me, it's just, I think Portland and Joe Cronin and the executives and even ownership, I think they just don't want to be the ones. This is like a hack take, but I'm not going to apologize for it because I think it's right. I think what they've done, drafting Scoot, not trading Sharp even last year, and definitely not trading either of those guys so far, is the right decision, because I think Portland is doing the smart thing by accumulating like super young, super high upside assets, and they're looking down the road, like just like any normal sane team would do that didn't also happen to have an iconic, $200+ million player on the roster that you owe something to. I think the Blazers are just waiting until Lillard asks for a trade so that they don't have to be the ones that are, saddled with, you ended this, like we're talking about The Last Dance, like, oh, now we're not going to be able to fruitlessly chase the 9th seed or whatever for the next couple of years, because that's what they've been doing. I just think that's by far the most logical way to explain all this. Is Portland absolutely is operating as if Dame will be gone, except it just doesn't want to be the one to make him gone. The Blazers want a trade request so they can do this, get the 2 firsts and Jaime Jaquez and Tyler Hero or whatever from Miami and move on. Like that is where this is going. It just can't end any other way.
I will say, I don't think they're in danger. People are saying of Bradley Bealing this up. Dame doesn't have a no trade clause, but they're going to operate as if he does. And so if you're probably going to trade him to Brooklyn or Miami when it happens, it seems like those best offers from those teams aren't going anywhere. So if you actually want to, I could understand that logic as a counter to your argument. And it's just, you're not going to Bradley Beal this up because he will have more value. But this organization, if and when they move him, they're not just going to send him wherever. It would take, like, if they just sent him to whatever team had the, like, if they just sent him to, I'm trying to think of like who just wouldn't be on his list, would be so outlandish, but like they might have interest in him. Like if he didn't want to go to Chicago, and like Chicago doesn't even have the best offer, but like they're not just going to send him to Charlotte because Charlotte offered them LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller. So, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's right. I also think, like, if you're just being as unsentimental about it as possible, aren't you a little bit interested in just having his contract off the books? Because what is in a Damian Lillard career year, you can finish 13th in the West. Like, you're returning almost that entire same team plus a rookie. As great as Scoot might be, probably not going to be very good in terms of winning this year. So it's like, what is the upside here? We just spend this money on Dame again. His value declines maybe incrementally because he gets a year older. He's not going to have as good a year as he did last year. I get it. The offers will be there, and this isn't like nobody's over a barrel really. But I think the offers get worse. I think they get worse the longer you wait.
Maybe, but I don't think they're going to be can't miss from Brooklyn or like Miami's best offer is not can't miss.
They're not very good now. Yeah, that's the thing.
So I'm just like, how much are they actually going to lower it? And at that point, is there value in, hey, you just said we know we could be 13th in the West with Dame having a career year. Are there worse scenarios than having Dame put butts in the seats, retaining that connection to the community organization, and then still winding up with a top lottery pick?
If you
think he's going to infringe,
the downside is we have to go through the same shit again for a full year of will they trade him? Will he ask for a trade? I'm sick of it. I'm ready I want a new slant.
Yeah, I totally get that, but I'm just like, as you said, they've proven, unless you think he's going to infringe on the development of Scoot Henderson and Shaedon Sharp, Damian Lillard is not like a monopolizing player. But I just think because there's so much positional overlap there that it's not. You would have to move Simons then to be like, okay, like let's make sure the pathway's open for Scoot. And I don't think it's as damaging to keep him. I just feel like there's a disconnect from either reality or there's this purposeful pageantry going on right now between both parties, where it's like Portland's trying to drive up the asking price, or as you said, it's this weird game of chicken where Dame doesn't want to be the player who asks her out. The Blazers don't want to be the organization that trades, their franchise talent.
And I think the uncynical take would be that, like, and maybe this is the case, that Lillard, like, sincerely doesn't know. Like, he really does want to see if they can do anything to make it, because, all things being equal, he seems very clearly to just want to be in Portland, which that's awesome. Like, great. Like, be where you're happy. The other thing you made me think of is like the butts in the seats thing. And like, I'm pretty sure if you say Scoot has the keys now, starting from game one, like people are going to be pretty psyched about that. So like the downside of trading Lillard, like from a PR standpoint and from there aren't a lot of them. I think it's a bummer. And the end of anything is sad. The end of the Lillard era in Portland will suck. Like, he's the best player the team has ever had. So like, that's hard, but just as like, what a soft landing that it's like, we got Scoot now. Like, we got another 10 years plus of like an awesome lead guard that everyone's going to love. It's just, everything lines up to just do this. And they haven't done it yet.
Can you take us through the Jazz's vitals, please?
Yes, I can. We went long there, but that's okay. Key free agents: Jordan Clarkson has a player option. Kelly Olynyk has a partial guarantee, which probably by the time you hear this, we'll have a decision on. It's June 28th. Talen Horton-Tucker also has a player option. No extension eligible candidates of note. The Jazz acquired John Collins and used up a significant chunk of their cap space, but they can still get to over $25 million if they keep Olynyk, and Talen Horton-Tucker opts in, and they renounce Clarkson, which Clarkson's going to be an interesting figure to talk about for this team.
Assuming he opts out, by the way. We haven't gotten news that he's...
We don't know.
Yeah.
Some trade exceptions here. Rudy Gobert, $9.6 million. Bojan Bogdanovic. This is funny. You go through all this and you're like, wow, the Jazz had all these guys. Alexander Walker, $5 million. Jared Vanderbilt, $4.4 million.
Which they do, by the way, for anyone who, we haven't mentioned this, you need to renounce your traded player exceptions, like to create the necessary, like if you want your max amount of cap space, TPEs count against your cap when you're under it. For
Can't hold on to all of those. Yeah. And I mean, that's an interesting question, probably not for this pod, but like, which ones are worth actually holding on to and for which teams? So Dan, their biggest needs, I mean, especially if Horton-Tucker is not back, which I'm not sure, seems unlikely. We can discuss him. Need a lead guard, right? Need a point guard, someone to run the offense. Anything else there?
No, they need wings. Like I want to segue into we really don't need to spend a ton of time on them, because I think they've kind of proven that they might not be ultra aggressive in free agency now, that they're going to look to take on the salary dumps. And like, John Collins was unique in that you didn't need pick equity to get him because you want to rebuild. Like, if John Collins has a good year, that is someone who might net you first round equity down the road. And if not, it certainly can be like worthwhile salary filler as part of a bigger trade. But like, I want to get into more of like Larry Markkinen can play the three. He spent most of his time playing alongside a 4 and a 5 last year. He did the same thing in Cleveland. But I still would have questions about this team defensively. Maybe having Walker Kessler and Taylor Hendricks sort of, nukes those concerns a little bit. But I want to get into the Collins fit. Is it like there are no wings to go after on them? Like, if you wanted to go after Jeremy Grant, now it's like, well, you have John Collins and Lowry. Like, that's not workable with Walker Kessler. So there just aren't like the lower end or mid end 2-3s that would come off the bench, or like a bigger 2. Like, even if you could get Chris Middleton, he no longer makes sense. But I mean, you could play super big, don't get me wrong, but they're not going to make that play. And so I gravitate towards, can they take a flyer on a Trey Jones that's restricted? I would just put Ayo Dosunmu on this team because he gives a damn about defense, but that's not really a primary playmaker type. The big question would be, they can get there. Like, they can force their way there. If you could get Fred VanVleet, would you do it?
And I'm using basically all of that $25 million I can clear to get him.
You would need to create more. It's, Talen Horton-Tucker opted out, or we actually had to waive, maybe you had to waive Kelly Olynyk, or you I actually think, would OKC just take Kelly Olynyk into cap space after that? I mean, like, the Pacers might take Kelly Olynyk into cap space. You could definitely move Kelly Olynyk at his full guarantee.
Yeah, I think I'd be well. The number would matter. Anything up above $25 million a year for VanVleet, which I think he's probably going to get, makes me a little nervous. But I mean, it is a position of need, and he is the type of guy that, like, I think he does does more good than harm as far as like how he would interact with someone like Markkanen. Like you don't want to, minimize Markkanen's role to any extent. I don't think that's an issue because VanVleet has played with all NBA forwards before and that hasn't been a problem. Yeah, I'm okay with that. It doesn't bowl me over. But I think, certainly Utah, well, I guess it goes into a bigger question. Utah just did take on a bad contract for, for some assets. So like, are they in a position where we're adding, a mid to late prime expensive point guard to this group, right? Because that would kind of run counter to what they've done so far. Because like, look, this rebuild started a year ago, and it just went way better than anyone expected. So maybe that changes your plans, but I'm not sure the best use of their assets is adding a guy that, I don't know about the timeline fit, but just isn't really in keeping with what they've done transactionally to this point and, under Danny Ainge, right? Does that make sense? Like it's more of a philosophical issue as opposed to like an on-court fit thing.
Do you know what would be more Danny Ainge at this point? This is about to aggravate a lot of people, and I'm not advocating for it. It would be more Danny Ainge to have acquired John Collins and have Taylor Hendricks, and now turns around and moves Lauri Markkanen at the absolute apex of his value.
Right. Which they will not do. Right. Like I can't, I mean, that would blow me away.
He had too good of a, I don't even think that, I think teams would not even give up enough to justify it because they think he would be due for sort of return to solid ground role. And so I just don't think there's value in doing it for Utah actually. But I'm saying to me, it would be more likely they trade Lauri Markkanen than they sign or throw other money at Fred VanVleet or Jeremy Grant or Chris Middleton. I think
I agree with that. And that just goes to like, it's so easy to forget where Utah is in its rebuild trajectory, right? It's like, these are early days. I love Trey Jones there though. I have to say that was a name you mentioned, but I'm a big fan of that one because that's not going to cost you VanVleet money. He's not as good as VanVleet, but he's like a steward, right? He's like a young game manager, which I don't hate for Utah.
I think they could be a team. Like, do you take a shot on Matisse Thybulle? I don't know what it takes to get him out of Portland. Just like, let's just bring like a really disruptive wing defender off the bench here. You could play. I mean, like you have a pathway now to play 5-out lineups with Markkanen and Hendricks and Collins, like sort of mix and match this. So you could surround him with enough shooting where it works. That's the only young, then like Cam Reddish is not for this team, but like young, disruptive. I thought about Bruce Brown a little bit for this team, but I alluded to that before. I don't think he gives you enough positional flexibility to guard up like around the 3 and the 4. And just, is it enough playmaking? It just, I mean, maybe for 2 years and whatever, like he's only 26 or 27. So he's not super old, but like those are the two names that kind of stood out. It's like if you were to invest in a defense first type of wingish player, maybe
it would be fascinating to see if, and Utah's in a position to just try this. Like, can Bruce Brown just be our starting point guard and actually play? You know what I mean? Like, because especially if you bring Clarkson back, for example, those two work fine together because Clarkson's going to be on the ball all the time anyway, or at least he lightens that load. I think it's kind of, I mean, the downside's pretty significant because their offense might just not work. But I think it'd be fun to see if Brown could play like, I mean, he came in the league as a point guard and then he's gone through all these different iterations. It'd be interesting to see if he could just do that full time again.
Honestly, you might just be like, you could flip him at the deadline. If it was a 2-year inflated salary, there'd be a team like Bruce Brown at 17 million. Yeah, sure. Why not? We'll do this. What did you think of? So they trade Rudy Gay in a 2nd-round pick for John Collins, the final 3 years and like 75-ish million, whatever it is left on his deal. What did you think of that trade? What do you think about his fit?
I love it for Utah, even if and I don't even really care that much about the fit, just because it's such a low price to get a guy that I don't know. It could just be that I've overvalued him forever, or I've expected there to be some upside after, the heights that he hit, 2-3 years ago. I think there's a great chance that, he just, maybe the finger's finally all the way better and he can hit shots again, maybe getting out of Atlanta, the change of scenery angle. It's just like a great buy low, and you got the cap space to do it. It didn't cost you anything, just Rudy Gay in a 2nd. Like that's crazy. That's like, I can't believe if we, even at the trade deadline, if that's the package you were told was going to ultimately get John Collins, I would have said like, man, did he go 0 for 1,000, for a full season? Is that what happened? Like, because
what's funny is, remember the reports where Danny Ainge wanted a 1st-round pick to take on John Collins, and I thought that was blasphemous. He ended up being closer than
Yeah.
I was to John
Right.
Collins' value.
Yeah. No, we've struggled for a long time to evaluate John Collins' worth. I will just say that for me, he's worth a heck of a lot more than a $6 million veteran contract in a second. I think I got to believe that if Utah just did this to rehabilitate and flip an asset, that the Jazz are going to come out ahead. And if he fits and plays well, then you maybe just keep him. I don't know. But I think the paths to success are many for Utah on this.
Yeah, I loved it. And it's just, I can't bring myself to care about Lowry. I mean, I did kind of lampoon it before he was going in, like his first season in Cleveland. Like, oh, they're going to play him at the 3. That's not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
It can work. We've seen it now work. The theory of it works. It certainly works on offense. It can be a little difficult against certain matchups on defense, but he's proven mobile enough to hold up. And you have Walker Kessler behind you now. I can't bring myself to care. If there's any concern, it's that just playing John Collins with Walker Kessler threatened to marginalize him the way that Atlanta ended up doing, because you can't ever use him as the primary rim runner. But Utah doesn't have like the backup 5 right now. Like, you can use John Collins in that role very easily, and you're going to surround him with better. If you don't think it's better spacing, it's certainly more volume from a 3-point perspective, where there will be room for him to actually roll.
And I know we hit our timer, but frame it this way. Like, would you care at all about, well, how's Rudy Gay going to fit with Kessler and Markkanen and like, no, of course not. And that's what it's an imperfect argument because it dismisses like the idea of opportunity cost. What could they have done if not Collins with that $25 million? But it's like, if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. Who cares? You wouldn't have like Rudy Gay was on the bench all year. You just swapped out Rudy Gay for John Collins. Like, so if it doesn't work, no big loss. Like, I don't care.
It's 2 years, and all of a sudden he's like a really awesome trade asset as an expiring contract if it doesn't work out.
Yeah, awesome move. Shall I take
us out of here? Yeah.
Yes, I do. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And if you are not following in all the various ways Dan mentioned at the top, I will go through some of them now. At HardwoodKnocks on Twitter and TikTok. If you are watching us on YouTube, or if you have ever watched us on YouTube, please subscribe and follow us on Instagram at Hardwood_Knocks. Wherever you're getting your podcasts, rate us, give us 5 stars on Apple, do all the nice things to tell us we're nice and make us more successful so we can do an even better job, because that's how these things work. What else have I missed? Buy some merch. We're both wearing it. I'm drinking from it. It's very versatile as merch goes.
We're working on the Hardwood Knocks goblet.
Ooh, a chalice. Can we get a chalice? I don't know what the difference is. And we'll close, as always, with shout-outs to the one and only Frank Ntilikina, and an apology to Jared Allen and also Mitchell Robinson, since that's what my shirt says today.